The critical minerals in the worst possible way that we can get them is still 99% better than oil and gas.
It's all relative.
Right? So let's start there.
Hello, and welcome to the Scientista podcast, where women in science rule. This podcast is all about supporting powerful women who lead with their brains. I'm behavioral scientist Dr. Shah Chakraborty.
And I'm former Assistant Secretary of State Monica Medina. The Scientista podcast brings you conversations with leaders, changemakers, and cultural figures, sharing how they're turning facts and evidence into real-world impact. So let's dive in. Today, we have a fabulous guest for you. It's one of the true rock stars of the climate and clean energy worlds, Jigar Shah. Welcome, Jigar.
Welcome, Jigar.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to give a plug to your podcast. You are back in the podcast world. Open Circuit podcast is broadcast on Latitude Media, and you're also a senior fellow at the World Resources Institute. And of course, you are really well known for all the work you did in the Biden administration at the Energy Department, where you ran a $400 million, maybe it was more, you'll tell us if I've got this number right, a $400 million loan program for energy entrepreneurs and innovators. And you were one of the true catalysts throughout your entire career in making the transition to clean energy and renewable energy. So welcome. We are thrilled to have you.
I feel like that number's in the billions.
Yeah, it was 400 billion.
A billion. Oh my God, I missed. All right, so 400 billion. It's not much.
But this is an example of how we all mess up zeros. This is a behavioral science teaching moment. A zero makes a big difference.
It's true.
400 billion. I mean, I've been in the federal government. Not many people get to spend, other than the Pentagon and the Energy Department on some other things, get to spend $400 billion.
Well, look, I think when you think about the energy transition and what it's going to take to rebuild the world, 400 billion is really a down payment to, helping us redo our supply chains and critical minerals, figuring out battery manufacturing, figuring out all these really important things. And so I think it was started at 40 billion when we came into office, and then was expanded under the Inflation Reduction Act.
Wow, that's just a lot of money. Let's talk about how we're going to make up for that, and we'll get there. So we always start, Jigar, with a question about how our guests got their start. And for you, I was really curious about whether clean energy or climate change was sort of the driver of your passion around this topic. Was it either one of those or both? And how did you get to the place where you had $400 billion to loan out to wonderful innovators doing great things in this space?
Yeah, no, it certainly was more climate tech than it was climate change. I was really fascinated by solar power as a kid, and realized that, when you think about learning about electricity, it's generally about burning something, making steam, turning a turbine, right? Creating electricity. And solar power is really one of the first really radically different ways of making electricity, where, you're really having photons unlodge, electrons off of a semiconductor substrate, collecting all those electrons and having DC power, right? Just like you would with a battery, and then having to convert that DC power to AC power, obviously to use it in your home. And so, like as a kid, you were like, well, this is great. Like it was invented in the 1950s. It must be super successful.
But did you grow up near solar energy?
No, I just read it in a book. And so as a result, you thought it's fine, right? It's in a book. It must be great.
Right.
And, like today people see things on YouTube and think it's good. It's great.
A book.
And then,
Times
later
have changed.
I realized that solar power was nowhere. It really, I think when I first entered the industry, it was 1995. And I think total sales of solar power were maybe 50 megawatts a year.
Yeah, it was nothing.
Right?
I was
really
in that
nothing.
world a little bit. I did independent power projects at the dawn of that era, and so it was all cogen then.
Totally.
And it was a tiny little.
Totally. And today we do 50 megawatts an hour, right? In the solar industry. I mean, it's crazy how big our industry is. So yeah, no, it was more technology that got me interested in the space. And then of course, over time, I learned more about climate change and how important, reducing our CO2 emissions is, et cetera. So, I mean, that has become a passion of mine, of course.
Yeah.
You've come a long way. I just have to let listeners know how we were together at the Earth Day Gala in 2024.
Yeah.
And Dennis Hayes presented you with the Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yes.
And I got a little something too. But you got the Lifetime Achievement Award. And he was basically pointing how what you've done in your career could be one of the most consequential of any one single person when it comes to the clean energy transition. So thank you for telling us your story of what got you here. You're being super humble. I mean, you don't have to give your acceptance
Well,
speech all over again, but tell our
yeah, I think
audience.
I like cried on stage that night. I mean, look, look, I have been able to be in a position to accomplish a lot in my career. And, some of it is pure luck, right? Obviously, I worked in the solar industry, realized that people didn't want to pay for 20 years of electricity up front and then wait 20 years to get the money back. And so financing was going to be critical. That financing model clearly has, supported over $2 trillion worth of projects now globally and has made a huge difference. And I appreciate that. And there were, as you know, success has many mothers and fathers. So a lot of people helped along the way. And then along the way, I've never worked in Wall Street, right? Even though that's a lot of money. And so Wall Street was involved. And so as a mechanical engineer, I asked a lot of dumb questions around like, well, why is it that way? Why does that work the way you're saying it does? Why don't you guys make money when I like do a transaction this way, right? And then so some of that knowledge has helped me reorient people's behaviors and incentives, and some of that knowledge like allowed me to change the way in which our technology comes to market. So as a result, I've become quite good at commercializing technology, right? And so that's how I went from solar to, generate capital, where we were doing battery storage and renewable natural gas and things like that, and then to the loan programs office, where the entire purpose of the office is to commercialize technology.
So interesting. Yeah. I mean, the tech part of this is fascinating, and it did take all this time, sadly, to get there, but luckily we're there. Now we just have to scale it.
And we're communicating about it. And you were doing such a great job as a podcaster at the Energy Gang, right? Which listeners to this podcast, you probably have a lot of crossover fans. Your current podcast, Open Circuit, is talking about all of this. It really comes down to getting audiences excited and on board, right? But the most recent election outcome shows that we weren't able to tell the story. Democrats weren't able to tell the story of clean energy in a way that really resonated with the majority of Americans. And it's clear that we've lost the information wars when it comes to the Biden administration's accomplishments in this energy transition. How do you reconcile this with what you do as a communicator, as a real advocate for the transition to clean energy? How can we win back public support in the United States, get the majority of Americans again really excited for a cleaner, brighter, healthier future, right? That's how we want to describe it.
No, it's a great question, and one that I think has multiple parts to it. I think one is that we have to recognize that the election was not fought on our issues. The
No.
election was fought on immigration. It was fought on other issues, and so I think it's important for us not to take the wrong lessons from the election. I think the second thing is, look, I think President Biden played a crucial role when people were dying every week of COVID, to like figuring out how we actually get through that crisis, figuring out how we, brought our economy roaring back in a way that frankly Obama didn't do after the global financial crisis, right? Figuring out how to pass the largest climate bill of our lifetimes in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think that the proof really for me is not in the election, it's in the OBBB bill, where the vast majority of the Inflation Reduction Act was left in place, right? So from a communication standpoint, there was a feeling that we're ripping all of the incentives out of the IRA. We're going to, repeal the IRA. No such thing occurred. Like most of the 45X production incentives for battery manufacturing and solar manufacturing still remain in place. Critical minerals, nuclear, geothermal, battery storage. What happened is there's a systematic phase out of the solar and wind tax credits, right, which are largely mature technologies. And so I think that when you really look back on the legacy of the Inflation Reduction Act, the OBBB by itself would be the second largest climate bill ever passed, right? By three,
That's
houses
so
of the
interesting to
Republican
think of
Party.
it that way.
That is a really interesting perspective on this. So
On
thank
what's
you.
been couched as a really negative thing. So let me ask one last question about that. I think, looking at wind in particular, it's really struggling right now, particularly
Yeah.
offshore wind. So you say that it's still, got a life, it's still got a pulse, but really, I mean, it's struggling.
Well, I think it's important to note that the renewable energy sector largely has survived by being penny wise and pound foolish and saying, if we can just slip things in under the radar screen in the dead of night, we're fine. We want to stay out of the radar screen. And like, now we're directly in the crosshairs, right? Like people are talking about us specifically and saying we'd like to hurt the solar and wind industry, right? And so staying under the radar screen doesn't work when people are targeting you.
Yeah.
Right? Now you actually need to build real power. And what does that mean? We have billions of dollars a year that our industry is spending on rent payments to landowners, right? To school districts in rural areas, right? To all of these people who really benefit from these technologies and they've never been organized. Right? Many of them don't know that their school district is getting money because of these systems that are in place, right?
Totally true.
And so that is a failing on our part by staying too far under the radar screen, right? There's an old television show that was like on Fox called like King of the Hill, where like Hank was like a propane guy. And every time he talked about propane, it was like a propane commercial, right? Most people work in the solar and wind industry. Their kids don't know that they work in the solar and wind industry. Right? They tell their kids that they work in the energy industry, right? When they have birthday parties and all the other parents come over, they say, I work in the energy industry. They don't say that I worked in the solar and wind industry. I think that needs to change, right? And
solar needs branding support.
They need branding support, but they also just need confidence, right? People need to recognize that like this stuff does sell itself and we are still 80% of everything that gets added to the grid every year. But from a politics standpoint, power doesn't come from passively just having people see your work. You have to advertise it. You have to market it.
Right.
You have to explain it to people.
Oil and gas companies do that,
Of course they do.
Like crazy, but they have the money to do it.
We also have the money to do it. We invest double the amount of money every year into capital that the oil and gas industry do. They do roughly $250 billion a year investment. We do $500 billion a year of investment, right? And so like there's the problem is we just don't put a line item in for these services, right? We sort of say, well, if we zero that line item out, we'll make a little bit of extra profit. Well, yeah, but what are you sacrificing by making that little extra profit, right? You're making this industry more vulnerable to all of these culture war attacks, which, you and I both know that like if solar and wind doesn't continue to play a role of 80% of everything added to the grid, then we're not going to be able to support AI. We're not going to support load growth. We're not going to support economic development, air conditioning, right? So as a result, my sense is that solar and wind will continue to thrive, right? But let's not take it for granted. Like we are under attack. That means that there is a strategy that we have to put in place to actually make sure that we are building our political power. We are electing people who have worked in our industry, right? And we are doing the things necessary to really create $1 billion a year budget to protect our $500 billion a year investment.
Makes sense when you put the numbers together that way. It really does. But getting them to do it is another thing. How do we get into those boardrooms? How do we get to those CEOs? How do we make sure that they see this as essential to their business model, to their life in business?
Well, I mean, look, the way that other industries have done this is by basically charging their members for these services, right? So when you look at like the Got Milk campaign from the dairy industry or the Got, pork, the other white meat, commercials, the way that they do that is everyone has to pay a little bit into the pie, whether you're profitable or not, right? Every single solar panel that gets installed puts $1 into this fund, right? And that dollar is then used to do this work. And, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but I would suggest that it's insurance to make sure your $500 billion a year business continues.
Yeah. Interesting.
Recently published a piece talking about the role of local governments, communities to step up and kind of make up for where federal government is promoting and the opposite agenda to what was happening in the Biden administration. Talk to our audience about how much the big, beautiful bill is really becoming a setback versus what, I mean, you're articulating it as we speak, what the reality is and what the numbers are, and you're painting a positive, optimistic future, but there's still a significant role that local governments need to play to close that gap, right? So how do you talk about it?
So we have thousands of what they call AHJs, right, which are basically the jurisdictions locally that make the rules for whether you can install solar or wind, right? And so that's generally not regulated at the federal level, although there are some federal permits required. Sometimes most of that is state and local regulations. And we have state and local regulations, particularly in blue states, where they make it very expensive to install solar. To give you an example, in Texas, if you want to put solar on your roof right now, the local town cannot stop you from doing that. That's a Texas law,
Right.
right? You get to hire a professional engineer, you file the paperwork, you can install that day, and then just make sure that you verify that the system was installed in a quality fashion. In California, if you do the same exact system, you have to wait 6 to 12 weeks to get permission to install the system, and you have to pay thousands of dollars to the local jurisdictions
It's
to
more
get that
annoying
permission.
in a blue state.
It's double the
More
price.
expensive. Yeah.
It's double the price in California versus Texas to put solar on your roof. That is ridiculous.
Who's taking that charge? Is it the local government? Do they see this as a moneymaker for them?
No, they just like the problem with most of these things is it's not thought through, right? It's not like we got here because someone said, let me figure out how to make money out of the solar industry. It's because some person who used to charge for those awnings that cover the backyard are like, well, let's use these same rules for solar when it makes no sense at all. And so we lazily got into this situation. And now we need to be very specific about now that the OBBB is passed and people are genuinely trying to figure out how to hurt our industry, how do we actually make changes at the local level to make our industry more competitive, right? And these are things that places have passed. Texas, Florida, and now recently New Jersey has passed a law that takes the power out of the hands of local government. And, Governor Murphy was very concerned and still hasn't quite signed the bill yet. Because he's concerned that he might piss off some people who have power right now over the solar industry who don't want that power taken away. And we just have to start getting smart, not just in solar and wind, but also in electric vehicles, in battery storage, and all these other important sectors for decarbonization.
Yeah, we're gonna ask some more questions about that. But you've hit on costs, and
Yeah.
it seems to me if you really want to get the public behind something, you make it cost effective. You make it lower cost for them, particularly now. The current president came into office promising to lower energy costs, and anything but that is happening. They're going up. And he's blaming that on solar and wind and renewables. These efforts that he's put in place are to sort of knock down the renewable energy, clean power industry as being too expensive. How do we fight back against that? And how do we make those cost savings actually reach the people who need them? You've talked a lot about how poor people shouldn't be paying more for energy, energy hungry appliances. They should be paying for energy efficient appliances.
Right.
It'll save them money. It'll save us energy.
Why aren't people so pissed about this?
Yeah,
Why
why
isn't
aren't
Trump's
they?
base so angry about
So I think they will be, and I think we need to help educate people. Look, I think one of the lines that people use is the best defense is a good offense. And I find a lot of times when people come after us and say solar and wind are the cause of these issues or whatever it is, we sort of say, no, they're not. As opposed to saying, look, the Energy Information Administration just published a report this week showing that they predict that natural gas prices are going to double because of the policies of this administration.
Yeah,
right?
crazy.
That's crazy, right? Natural gas turbines are 3 times more expensive because of the policies of this administration. I think when you think about the only way that we're going to really be able to meet all the load growth that we want to meet and do that affordably is using demand flexibility tools, right? So virtual power plants, grid enhancing technologies, meaning getting more out of
So
the grid.
explain what a virtual power plant is for those of us who are not so steeped in it. I think I understand.
No, it's
but I'd
really
love to
demand
hear.
flexibility. What you find is the grid is built so that for the worst possible day, right, hot or cold, it still keeps the lights on, right?
Right.
So the rest of the time, it's only used 40% of the time.
It's like your
right?
car sitting in your driveway.
Totally, right? And so now the question becomes that worst day, are there things that could be shifted on that worst day to make it less worse? Right. And so if your water heater is on heating up your water, does it have to do it at the worst possible hour, or
Right.
could that like wait 10 hours, right? Does your electric vehicle have to charge right then when you come home from work, or can it wait until like 9 p.m. to charge, right? Because it
2
doesn't
a.m.
matter,
when it's
right?
not
2
hot.
a.m. And so what we're finding is there's tons of these opportunities equal to 20% of our entire peak demand. So
Wow.
20% of that worst day are loads that are fully optional, that no one intended to have that load on at that time. But like we just lazily plug in our phone or do this thing and that thing and whatever else, and we don't care. And so if we shift that stuff, which we can, because every single thing that you buy now comes with an app on it. Like, even this humidifier I bought recently has an app. I don't even know what to do with this app, but like they have it, right? So once you have that connectivity, you have the ability to say to people, if I give you a 20% discount on your bill, are you willing to be flexible?
Does
And
that require interstate cooperation that then
no,
kind of, no, you can do it
no,
all
that's
within?
why it's the killer app. Is it doesn't require any of that. All it requires is the utility giving you a 20% discount to participate in flexibility, right? And if they do that, which many utilities are now jumping at the chance to do this because they recognize that they are being caught flat-footed and this is the only way for them to meet load growth, then, then a lot of people will save 20% of their bill. And the people who don't want to save 20% of their bill can opt out and say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want flexibility, right? Which
This is the future. I mean, it's coming. The technology is already there just to make us as efficient as possible to take advantage of the infrastructure we have in place, right? As the infrastructure becomes better and better.
That's exactly right. And then on transmission lines, it's hard to site a new transmission line, as many people know.
Yeah.
But we now have the technology to take the existing transmission line we have now, replace the cable with a new type of cable that we invented 20 years ago. So it's not that new. And it carries 3 times as much power.
Wow.
Right. And so this is American innovation at work, and we have to figure out how to get them commercialized faster.
I see why you're positive, right? This is the energy that we need. These are the stories we need to hear. This is what we need to get out there. That being said, I'm really sad about electric cars. It seems like they were cool, and thanks to Musk, and then Musk isn't cool, and so they're not cool, and people have range anxiety. I'm definitely guilty of that. I would have gotten an electric car much sooner had it not been for my frequent drives to New Jersey, where my family is, from Washington, D.C. And I know that there's places to power up along the way, but I was getting nervous. I'm totally guilty. I'm admitting this. I'm using this podcast as an open therapy session. Apologies. But what do you think? What's the future of electric cars now? What is going to happen in terms of where the United States was going with the electric car revolution? Have we just handed it all off to China?
So both my parents and my in-laws have recently bought a new car. And they really wanted to buy an electric vehicle, and I told them no. I got them a plug-in hybrid vehicle instead, right? Or got them to buy a plug-in hybrid vehicle instead. And it's 35 miles of range. And, if they don't fill up the gas in their car, then there's an error light that comes in saying your gas is stale after 3 months. Both of them have that error light.
Wow.
Right? So with 35 miles of range, they are not using gas. Right? So I think part of our problem is that we have this perfect is the enemy of the good challenge. And when you look at like Stellantis, for instance, a lot of their offerings are plug-in hybrids. You're starting to see a lot more of that stuff out of Ford and General Motors as well. And I'm here for it, right? I think what you're seeing in the state of California is many people are moving to 50 miles of range for the plug-in hybrid. So when you want to go to New Jersey, use gasoline, but the rest of the time you're using your car, you're using electric, right? And it eliminates range anxiety. Everyone knows that an electric vehicle has a lower cost per mile, so you end up using the electric anyway. My parents are actually plugging in a level 1 charger, so directly into the socket in the wall.
Into the socket. That's great. So you don't even need one of those.
And so you don't even need a level 2 charger, right? And so I think when you think about what the future looks like for America, right? I think America is a very large country with a very mobile population that likes to travel to New York or New Jersey, right?
They live in Wyoming.
Or they live in Wyoming. And most days they travel less than 50 miles. And some days they travel more. And I think all of us should be a lot less judgmental and realize a lot of that technology is really cutting edge stuff. And it can save 90% of all emissions from transportation.
And cut you a lot of costs too.
Yes.
From
you don't
rising
need
oil
that,
and gas prices as well.
Totally. And you don't need the 125 kilowatt hour battery. You can have a 25 kilowatt hour battery. So you think about how much costs you're saving in terms of critical minerals and all the other other stuff, right?
Hybrid is where it's at.
Hybrid.
I think that America is really going to embrace hybrids in a way that maybe other countries have decided to go all in.
I don't have a plug-in hybrid, but I have a hybrid, gas hybrid.
That's
and
not
I
good
get-
enough.
It's not good enough, but it's so much better
No,
than the same
no,
car
no, no.
was. It
You
gotta
have
be a
got to
plug-in?
plug it in,
Okay.
and it has got to
Next
use
car,
electricity from the
plug-in
outside.
hybrid.
So
Committed
for all of
right
you
here.
people, I'm not going to allow you to feel good with the hybrid. You need
The
a plug-in
37
hybrid.
miles to a
We're
gallon
keeping
is
everyone honest.
yes is not good enough. I will
I appreciate you have an older car that's still a hybrid, but your next car needs to be a plug-in
Plug-in
hybrid
hybrid.
or battery electric vehicle.
See, this is why I didn't get a full electric. I was waiting for this conversation and to hear directly from the expert.
So let me ask you about another thing you just touched on, which is artificial intelligence. And
Yeah.
it's, obviously it's got us all swept up. And it's certainly a huge time saver. We all, I think, are going to learn how to use it. If you haven't learned already, I have now.
Yep.
And I'm old. So I actually love it. But I know it's an electricity, it's a power sucker. It just takes a ton of power and we see, the evidence of all these great big facilities being created to, power these places that, allow us to do this stuff on computers super fast. I guess the new thing is nuclear power dedicated directly to these. And is that a good idea? I'm
It's a
one of
great
those
idea.
people who was like nuclear free way back,
A lot of
way
people
back,
were.
like your grandmother.
You're still
Sure.
welcome to the party. I mean, it is nuclear power is amazing. I just want to make
What do
sure
we
that
do with the waste? Like, I
the
mean, you
waste is-
sat at the energy department. I sat at the defense department. It was frightening. What
So we have the largest fleet of nuclear plants in the entire world, in the United States. We do not allow reprocessing, which I think we should change, but I wasn't in charge of that. And the total amount of waste that we've created in our entire lifetime of running nuclear power since the 1960s is basically like a football field full of waste that's like 10 feet high. So
but it's
and-
leaking out in some really bad
it is
places.
not leaking out.
No?
To be clear, our nuclear waste is the safest and best run nuclear waste system in the world. What was leaking out was really poorly made nuclear bombs
Yes.
at Hanford
Well,
and
that's
other
probably
places.
true.
And that
It's
has nothing
bombs
to do
versus
with nuclear power.
plants. Okay.
And just want to
All
make
right.
sure we're clear.
Point made.
Like nuclear power is really well done, and it is safely, stored in these casks by a company called Holtec, which is, out of New Jersey, which is I think the largest company in New Jersey and the largest
New Jersey's
exporter.
now come up twice.
So, and I think Chris Singh, is taking that company public here pretty soon. So it's great. So nuclear power is great, but more importantly, I think it's important to recognize that if you want to decarbonize the whole grid, and you do it with solar, wind, hydro, battery storage, and a larger grid, that system is about 37% more expensive than having nuclear and geothermal clean firm power in the mix, right? And so if we want to have the lowest possible cost electricity grid, you're going to have to get comfortable with clean firm power generation, which is largely going to come from nuclear power.
Interesting.
I
Okay.
really
I'm
wanted you
getting
to.
there.
I wanted you to ask that question because I definitely have a conflict of interest with nuclear as well. So I'm so glad you were able to articulate that because I'm excited about nuclear, but also
We all should be excited about nuclear. I'm also excited about solar. I hate when people pit the two against
Right.
each other.
Right.
We need both.
yeah, we absolutely do. Okay, so another potentially controversial topic because you just take them head on. Nothing scares you,
let's go.
Jigar.
Bring it,
One.
bring it.
And this is, it's interesting what's happened with the critical minerals mining conversations. Initially, everybody was all for it. This was going to be the future of electric, and then it became more clear how much energy was needed to mine, to identify.
And how much waste it creates.
Yes,
Makes
there's
it
a lot of
not
issues around.
clean
I mean,
to
Monica's the
mine.
expert here. She's at the
Oh.
State
Right,
Department.
of course. And this is not, it's not the magic bullet necessarily that it was initially touted as. So talk to us about critical minerals mining, and is there an opportunity to take advantage of existing batteries? Can we invest more in circularity and really recycle batteries in a way that builds that capacity, or do we need to?
So let's first reject the premise of the question, right? When you think about how much destruction we create to habitats around the world from pumping out 100 million barrels a day of oil out of the ground and
Putting it on
associated natural
ships.
gas, putting it on ships, doing refineries. No one uses the pet coke anymore. So we're disposing of the pet coke,
Trains,
right? All of
pipeline.
that stuff is offset by these critical minerals, right? And so the critical minerals in the worst possible way that we can get them is still 99% better than oil and gas.
It's all relative.
Right? So let's start there. Then you're right that like as we scale up, we have to get a lot of minerals for sure. And then as we start to become more flat, right, in terms of going from 20 million EVs a year to 40 million to 50 million, and then hopefully stabilizing, because I don't think we actually need as many cars as we have right now. So I hope we don't replace them all with electric vehicles. I hope we actually use more public transit and other things. But
Car sharing?
yeah, but as we stabilize to like 50 million EVs a year, right? Then I think you can do a lot more circularity. And we're seeing that, right? So Crusoe and Redwood just took a whole bunch of used EV batteries and created a microgrid for AI in less than 60 days in Nevada using, old EV batteries.
Is there, I mean, I am really into circularity.
Yeah.
I feel like, we just waste a lot of stuff in most of our industrial and even our consumer.
Clothes are the biggest thing we waste.
There's a lot.
The average person only wears their shirt or pants.
Is it true three
seven
times?
times
Better than
on average.
Fast fashion. It's so
right?
cheap.
Yeah, and but you've got companies like Cirque and others who are now able to recycle, because it used to be you could only
Fiber,
recycle like pure cotton or pure polyester. Now you can do blends.
Yep.
And so, look, I think you're absolutely right. Policy is required to be clear.
Yes.
You need policy to be able to get circularity going. But I do think that our landfills are filling up. We can't keep filling
China
them up
doesn't
with
take
clothes.
this stuff anymore.
Right? We can't keep filling up with
Nope.
plastic.
No.
We can't keep filling it up with all these other things, food waste.
Food waste,
right?
huge.
So
huge
we need to start actually being more circular. I agree with you.
And so how do we do that? Even in particularly I think about solar panels and wind turbines.
Well, we have 3 major solar panel recycling companies now in the United States that were stood up by the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And
glass.
they're crushing it. No, they're crushing it. They're doing such a good job. They're selling all these precious metals. They're reclaiming the glass. No, they're doing a fantastic job. It's the best technology in the world. And now they're starting to export their technology to India and other places.
Right. Well, it's much easier, I would say, to collect those things from places where they're industrialized, they're industrial scale, than it is to try and pick up every piece of plastic, every plastic.
Well, I think the big thing is that the United States needs to recognize, like Europe already has, that there's extended producer responsibility, that when you buy things, you have to pay a little bit more to actually pay for the disposal of it at the end of life, right? You can't just leave that to be socialized.
Right.
It has to be part of the initial purchase
Doesn't
price.
happen. It just, wears on communities near landfills or, whose water is completely contaminated because of.
Well, we have to reprice. We have to pay the true price of products and services going forward.
Yeah. Well, and it's a big deal because, it used to be that the average, ton of garbage used to, go about 100 miles to get disposed of. Now it's close to 500 miles that it travels to get disposed of. And so it's getting worse and worse. It's getting more and more expensive. And so I do think a lot of these solutions are on their way to being profitable. And so now we just need to get the policy right to force people out of inertia.
Well, let's talk about also food. You talked about the revolution in agriculture for cotton and fibers, but what about for food as well? I know that was a subject of one of your recent podcasts.
Yeah,
and it's another place where I think everybody can relate to wanting healthy food. That's certainly a big movement right now. But how do we make the food business and the ag business much more circular, much more climate friendly?
Well, I think, look, we have to recognize that we built what we have now on purpose, right? We do, have all these complicated programs, which closely, know a lot about, where, we buy all of this excess food production from our farmers and we use it for food aid around the world.
We used to.
We do a lot of these things. And then we decided that we could grow more. And so we decided to grow tons of ethanol and bio crops, right? And look, I think that we're starting to recognize that those bio crops are probably not a great use of that land. And so as we move away from gasoline will probably peak, globally and certainly in the United States here over the next few years. As that peaks, right, that means ethanol usage goes down. And so now the question becomes, what do you do with all that land?
Right. Ethanol was a thing that you put in gasoline to make it cleaner.
That's right. That's right. And so oxygenates. And so now what we need to do is to recognize that like we had a policy, we put that in place on purpose. We're now sort of moving away from that, right? But I think that demonizing all the people in the middle isn't productive because I don't think when you talk to the people who work at Cargill or ADM or all these other places, I don't think they believe that they're demons. I think they work super hard to
They
make sure
believe they're feeding America.
they're feeding America and feeding the world. And so the question now becomes, how do you use policy? Like most of the people I talk to say that the USDA has all the money they need to make this transition. It's really the incentives they're providing to farmers have to be provided in a way that's more climate aligned.
Right. And it
compared
was
to where it
getting
is
there.
now.
That was
It
another thing that
was.
was in the bills that Biden
It
passed.
was.
But hopefully it won't all go away. Because I think farmers were actually getting the message and starting to want to be more efficient and effective and less impacted by climate, and wanted to be part of the solution.
I think that's right. But I also think we need to be honest about the fact that, Secretary Vilsack was there a little too long and liked to do things really slowly. And so, hopefully the next time around, like there'll be a secretary who wants to move a little faster.
I take that point. I think it was hard to get people to move as fast as we needed to. I think that's sort of my takeaway from my time in government.
Well,
Was,
especially
gosh,
with
if
the
only we
Trump
could have moved even
administration and how
faster.
fast
Oh,
they're
look at
moving.
them.
I mean, why
So
would we
government
worry
does
about
move fast. That's
it? It
actually one thing
can.
we've learned.
It certainly
in this
can.
administration.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have talked about sectors like agriculture. We've talked about fashion. We've talked about food. We have so much more we could pick your brain on. I hate that it's coming to a close. So we've got two more questions for you. You're a leader in innovation and science. There's a lot of struggle right now, broadly, across those who are working in innovation in terms of getting the resources that they need to move technologies from ideas, from something abstract to something that's really commercially viable. And that's really where you sat in your
Yeah.
most recent role. So, what are the strategies from that time in government that you can share with our audiences so that they can actually get funded? They can move their ideas forward, especially for women.
Yeah, women, I think, are particularly challenged in this space for whatever reason.
For a lot of reasons. I mean, none of them good. But like, I think, look, we're in an interesting spot right now where we have a war against science, right? And I don't know how to replace that funding, right? So if you want to do a PhD or you want to do something in a really interesting area and the National Science Foundation isn't there to show up, I don't know where you get that money from. And I think we all need to be honest about the fact that there is a fundamental role for government in many of these areas that I cannot answer the question for those roles. I think for people who are in the space of like raising venture capital, right? I do think that we have done a lot of work to push the venture capitalists to really reflect on some of the hidden biases that they have. And I do think that they are far better today. And frankly, there are a lot of women who are partners at a lot of these venture capital firms who have started to become a lot more open to supporting women founders. But let's be real about this, right? The way this stuff works is you live and die by your ability to raise money.
Yep.
Right. You really do. And so today there is more money available today than I've ever seen in clean tech. Right. So people are like risk off. Right. So they're not investing as freely as they were before. But the amount of money they've raised that are sitting in funds right now are higher than they've ever been. Right. And so I want to make sure that people recognize for people that have good ideas, the money's there. But what is challenging is, if they give you money in their seed stage and then you can't raise your A stage, well, then they lose their money in the seed stage.
Right.
So part of what they're judging you on is not just your idea, but also your ability to keep raising money. Right. And so that means that you might have to bring in a partner who's really good at raising money. Right. And I think people just have to be very practical about what it takes to see through the 10-year timeline it takes to bring a great idea all the way to full fruition.
Sure.
Wow. Well, it's great advice. And I think, our audience will really appreciate it from someone like you with all this experience. And again, it does require patience. It does require diligence and it requires resilience. And our last question is always about how our guests have been resilient, have dealt with some kind of real huge roadblock or setback. Tell us about a time in your career where you hit a real wall and what did you do and how did you overcome that? moment.
Jigar's like, which one?
Yeah.
So many to choose from. Look, I think that there's a couple of big themes in my life. I'd say one big theme is that I have an extraordinary wife that, I've been married to for 25 years. And, I think,
Congratulations.
Shout out to
thank
spouses.
you. And you guys know this firsthand, but when you're doing the work you're doing, right, part of this is the work itself, and part of this is the communications part of it, right? And when you do the communications part of it, a lot of times you need to be in person, right, at COP or at Rio Plus 20 in Rio or in London for London Climate Week or for New York Climate Week.
Or all of them.
And it means that you have to spend a lot of time away from family. And I think part of the challenge that I see is recognizing that people have a really hard time understanding which events are important, which events are too much, right? And what the downside risk really is of sacrificing your family for this work, right? Because people are not one dimensional, they have multiple dimensions. And, like you only get back out of those relationships what you put in, right? And if you're not investing in those relationships and you're still investing in these other things, and I had to learn that, the hard way, right? When I ran the Carbon War Room, I was, having to fundraise for a nonprofit, as many people do. And, you travel around the world because you think that the donors are going to be there and that like FaceTime with them is going to mean you're going to raise more money, et cetera. And like, it weighs on you. And I think today I'm in a much better place where I see the value of balance and I'm able to just say no to things because I just can't do it. But for a lot of people, they really think it's life or death for their business or their effort. And I get it. But I think people need to like refrain from being all on one dimension and not finding that other balance.
What great advice. Learning to say no is one of the hardest things. I think if I look back on my own career, I wished I'd said no a few more times.
Yeah.
I think I would have shown up better in the places where I was.
That's right. That's exactly
Well,
right.
Jigar, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
cannot say thank you enough. This was incredible, and time flies when you're having fun. Truly, this went so fast, and we have so many more questions for you, so we have to bring you back.
Please come
Yay.
back. Please come
Anytime.
back. Yeah. Hopefully in another 6 months or so, we'll have a lot more to talk about.
Oh my gosh. Every month. I mean, the one thing I would say at the end here is that we are filled with extraordinary people in our industry. And I think that part of the challenge that we have right now is that there's so much chaos around us that we have such a hard time just being there for each other.
Yeah.
And I think if people just worked a little bit harder in being there for each other, I think we would be able to just continue to like hit all of our milestones and continue to like thrive even with all this chaos.
Yeah, well, it's great advice, a great observation that positivity really does help a lot when you're in these tough times.
Yeah.
So thank you to those who have tuned in for listening to the Scientista podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, help others discover us by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Tell a friend. We really appreciate your support.
You can always find us at scientista.world for more stories, updates, and ways to get involved. And I think if there's anything we take away from this podcast, we all need to get involved in the energy transition and a cleaner, brighter, more productive future with clean energy. Thank you, Jigar.
Thank you.